when the decision is made to deploy the National Guard for a domestic mission, a massive and expensive logistical machine kicks in, and the headline number, potentially $1 billion or more, can seem abstract. But when you break it down, you start to see a complex web of costs that land on the federal taxpayers like you and me. To get the true financial impact, we have to look at this deployment piece by expensive piece. Now, this is the federal price tag. The most immediate cost is the soldiers themselves. Unlike active duty military, National Guard members are part-time soldiers with full-time civilian jobs. So when they're activated for a mission like this, they get pulled away from their careers as teachers, mechanics, software developers, and small business owners. And that activation instantly triggers a cascade of expenses paid for by the government. Michael says, how many times has the National Guard been used on American soil? I don't know. Usually the National Guard is called in at some point after a national disaster. So at least once a year, because we have a national disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake or something like that that devastates the nation. And usually when that happens, the National Guard is deployed. But if we think about so far, I know the National Guard should have been out there when California caught on fire. The National Guard should have been out there when the riots were occurring. The National Guard should be out there just about every time a riot occurs. So I would say about 7 or 8 times this year already that I can think about. But statistically, I'm not exactly sure. But that's a good question. But it's not just how often they get deployed, it's how long are they deployed for. If they're only going to be out there for a couple days, it's only a small impact. But if they're going to be out there for a few weeks or several months, it's going to be a lot. He says 7 times. So that means I've hit the nail on the head. But it costs money every time you deploy them, though. Because you're not sending like 60 guys out. You're not sending a handful of people. There's a lot of people going out there. Make sure as you guys come in here that y'all like and subscribe. The cost for just one Guard member on deployment is significant. Based on data from similar federal deployments, the cost can be around $350 per Guard member per day. That number isn't a simple salary. It covers base pay, which changes with rank and experience, but it also includes a ton of other benefits. These troops get housing allowances, food stipends, and critical health care benefits for their entire deployment. Depending on the mission, they might also get hazardous duty pay, adding another layer of extensive expenses for us. So let's put that in a unique perspective. If we assume a deployment of 5,000 troops, the daily personal cost alone would be staggering. At a conservative estimate of $530 per troop per day, a 5,000 troop deployment would cost taxpayers about $2.65 million every single day. $2,650,000 every single day, just for the soldiers' pay and basic allowance. Over a 60-day period, that one line item swells to over $159 million. A smaller deployment in Washington, D.C. of around 2,100 troops was estimated to cost nearly $1 million per day. Okay? Now, these funds are typically drawn from the Department of the Army and Air Force budgets under a federal funding status known as Title 32. Now, this allows Guard members to operate under state command, but with a federal paycheck. It means the financial burden doesn't fall on Tennessee directly, but on the national defense budget, paid for by taxpayers in all 50 states. So the indirect cost, though, is the economic loss to not just our taxation, but also the home communities, as these citizen soldiers are pulled from their jobs for what could be an extensively long period of time. But the soldiers, you have the machinery of the operation themselves beyond those soldiers. You have to think about a military deployment is a logistical beast, and every single part has a price. So just transporting thousands of soldiers and their equipment to Memphis is the first major expense. This can involve commercial flights, military transport aircrafts, and convoys of ground vehicles, each racking up huge fuel and maintenance costs. Once they're on the ground, the logistical train keeps running, and it runs on money. The vehicles used, from Humvees to patrols to larger transport trucks, are famously inefficient. Consistent operation in a city means immense fuel consumption, easily running into millions of dollars over a few months. Now, this was a hard lesson from other large domestic operations like Texas's operation on Lone Star, where fuel was a major and reoccurring expense. Then there's the cost of housing and feeding thousands of troops. While some might be housed on military bases, a deployment this big often means renting out entire hotels or setting up temporary barracks, which comes with contracts for catering, sanitation, and utilities. Now, these are not small expenses. They represent a constant daily financial drain. And then there's equipment. Now, this isn't just vehicles, but also communication gear, surveillance equipment, body armor, and non lethal weapons. So, all this hardware needs maintenance, replacement parts, and a supply chain to support it. Now, every radio that needs a battery, every tire that needs replacing, every piece of tech that needs an update adds to the bill. And this is where we see the parallel to massive state run operations like Operation Lone Star in Texas, because that border security mission, which has 10,000 Guard members at its peak, has cost taxpayers in Texas and around the United States over $11 billion since 2021. What is that? Now, the budget for that operation covered a huge list of logistical needs, from building barriers to paying for the travel. And that is huge. Now, Michael says taxpayers always cover the bill. And just increasing the police force over time would be a better idea. I believe that giving them better training so that they don't get fired would probably be better too. I also believe that when you start talking about increasing the policing in the cities, hold on a second. Wrap your mind around this. Certain violent crimes only occur because the person not obeying the law is the only one armed. Usually, individuals that are in areas where the person breaking the law is outgunned by civilian weapons, they're less likely to commit a crime in that area. Because, I mean, how can you rob the local gas station when everyone in the gas station is armed? How can you rob the local bank when there's 40 people in the bank and 10 cashiers behind the counter and everybody's armed? You're not going, even a team of 5 rushing into a bank during banking hours, and that bank has 10 or 20 customers, the security guard and 5 or 10 people behind the desk that's counting the money. That's too many armed people. You're not going to be able to run in there and take out 25 or 30 people to get to the money in the safe. I mean, yeah, you could improve the police academy. You could fast track them because they're only taught how to capture people and put them in jail. The police do not know squat about the law, which makes the knowledgeable people these days who know what their rights are and what they're allowed to do under the law to have a tough time, because police officers are taught to be a authoritative figure over the situation, not actually be knowledgeable of the situation, which means that even a good cop can make a bad decision and cause harm to citizens, which is way worse. A good cop making a bad decision is way worse than a corrupt cop making a selfish, beneficial decision, because they're all still taught regardless to cover it up. They don't atone for their scenario. They make excuses. I have a tough job, this, that, and the third. And then everybody writes the same story in their report so that they don't get in trouble with IA, but that does not save the civilians. And while the laws do exist to protect civilians, the laws that exist to protect civilians are very rarely enforced. Usually police officers are allowed to get away with these situations before there's a justification. So with the laws that are being changed as we speak, and civil action is happening more and more often, you don't have as many police officers out there running the streets causing chaos. But the lack of policing is an ability for more individuals to get out there and run ragged. One of the things that we also can recognize, though, in addition to that, is the understanding that there is a very, very small percentage of police officers per population. And if they did increase the numbers, it would make more sense. Michael says there's 54 National Guard units across America, 1 in each state. Right. Now, if you call them all to work, you start looking at a whole nother issue. He said, cool, $11 billion. That's like maybe 5 IMB or IBM missiles. Less missiles, more troops, huh? While the Memphis deployment is a federal action, the cost structure is similar. It shows just how quickly these costs can spiral, often dwarfing the initial personal expenses. And it's important to understand how these deployments are paid for. Now, in the government, the term color of money is not green. It describes how funds are set aside for specific purposes and can't easily be used for other purposes, which is the reason why they had dark money, black money sitting in places where when Elon was assessing a bunch of budgets, there were certain stacks of capital set in certain places that nobody had access to, that nobody knew existed there, because the people who put it there are no longer empowered to utilize it. He says, money has no value until it's used. Well, you're right. The value of things is depending upon how much somebody else desperately wants or needs it. So greed fuels the need for capital. And desperation is a form of greed. For a deployment like the one we're dealing with in Memphis, funding is typically authorized as an emergency measure, which lets the executive branch get to the cash quickly. Often, this means money gets diverted from other parts of the federal budget, like education. um, the funds paying for the guards in Memphis might have been originally meant for something entirely different, like Social Security or food stamps. Maybe training exercises, equipment upgrades, or even base maintenance. For example, to fund Operation Lone Star, Texas repeatedly moved hundreds of millions of dollars from the state's prison system, and in one case, 359.6 million was pulled from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to fund the border operation. Federal COVID-19 relief funds have also been used to backfill state budgets to allow more spending on these kinds of missions, which is probably one of the reasons why not everybody got their COVID check during COVID year. Now, this process of moving funds around highlights a critical point. This money isn't just created out of thin air. It's a reallocation of your tax dollars. The decision to spend $1 billion in Memphis is also a decision not to spend that $1 billion somewhere else. It's a trade-off, not necessarily a fair one, but it's a trade-off nonetheless. Like it says, and it's a tax write-off as well, so it's not costing you anything. Well, it's not costing the government anything. That money is costing Memphis a lot of money, because you got to think about where else the money is coming from. People who aren't showing up for work, the companies are short staffed. Some small mom and pop shops that was owned by the person that was enlisted, those places are closed, so now your favorite places are not accessible or they're overstocked. With things like the high usage of fuel, it's not like they bring their own fuel. More often than not, they access local fueling systems, which means that the price for gas might go up because the gas has a higher demand. There's a lot more going on here. In analysis of the DC deployment pointed out that its daily cost was more than 4 times what it would cost to provide affordable housing for the citizens' entire unhoused population. Now, I just want to point that out real quick because that's a very interesting concept. Because truthfully, some of the things that they're out there doing, and we're going to be going into that coming soon, some of the things that they're out there doing is arresting homeless individuals and incarcerating them, increasing the demand for reasonable due process, where these people are going to have to sit in jail till they go to court, get released on their own recognizance, show up for court 30 days later, probably take a plea deal and get credit for time served, where they're still not solving the problem when they could have been redirecting this money towards stable housing so they would have less people that are homeless. Crazy. This forces a bigger question about priorities. Is a militarized presence the best way to use $1 billion of taxpayer money to improve public safety? That's a pretty nostalgic question to ask. Man, I was sitting over here thinking I had an extra bottle of ice water up here. The federal price tag then is a 3-headed monster, because the direct cost of paying and supporting soldiers, along with the enormous logistical bill for running the operation and the opportunity cost of diverting billions of dollars that could have been used for other national priorities, that's a pretty steep scenario to be in. He said, taking from Paul and paying Mary. And Mary is not a virgin, no matter what she say about that situation. Yes, redirecting the budget in other places will definitely set foot in the realm of robbing Peter to pay Paul, or in this situation, robbing Peter to pay Mary. And that's before we even get to the financial burden that lands on the city of Memphis itself. So while the government foots the bill for the guards' direct operation, Memphis won't be shielded from the financial fallout. The arrival of thousands of troops will be set off and causing a chain reaction of secondary costs that fall right on the shoulders of the local taxpayers. Now, this hidden cost is going to come out in the form of a bill, and it's going to be a collection of expenses that are less visible than Humvees on the streets, but are used just for this particular situation and could strain the city's resources for years. Because as they're doing this push-pull method of pushing a bunch of troops in and pulling a lot of resources out, there isn't much effort to recycle that money back into the economy. Man. Now, the story of a federal deployment often sounds like local police are just getting some backup. The reality is a lot more complex and costly. So the Memphis Police Department would have to dedicate a huge portion of its resources just to coordinate with the National Guard. Now, this isn't a passive role. It means joint patrols, sharing intelligence, and setting up a unified command structure. He says, do you ever wonder if you painted the donkey blue, it still would be an ass? Well, actually, yeah, that would be a fair assessment. That would be a fair assessment. Recognizing that no matter how you change it, no matter how you rename it, it is what it is until you do something different about it. Now, all of this takes manpower, which means overtime pay for all of the Metro PD or the Memphis PD officers. Officers who would normally be on their regular beats would get reassigned to liaison duty. Administrative staff would be buried in the work of managing communication between agencies. And this spike in overtime and administrative costs can be quickly burned through a police department's budget. Now, this is going to possibly force cuts in other areas like community policing or youth outreach. They're very programs often credited with reducing crime in the long run anyway. Now, beyond the police, other city services would feel the strain. A large military force in a city creates logistical headaches for sanitation, traffic management, and emergency medical services. Streets might be blocked for operations. Bus routes could be altered, and the city's infrastructure will get worn down by heavy military vehicles. So while it is hard to put a number on these costs, trying to get ahead of it in time, that's going to be a real drain. and it's going to directly impact the city's budget. A key part of the administration's mission is the crackdown on crime, right? Which always means a surge in arrests, right? While this might be presented as a success, each arrest starts a costly journey through the legal system. That's very interesting. He said he going to sleep. Ah, well, it is hot as bejesus over here, so I'm over here trying to. Whew, it's like 90 something degrees now. I can't remember the last time it was this hot in Florida in September. But we've gotten through a little bit of what's going on there. So we're going to be able to walk through the other half of this. So we're almost done. Not quite, but kind of, sort of. Each arrest is going to cost a journey. Remember that. Now, a system funded mainly by the system and the county is going to be very strained. First, there's the cost of processing the arrest itself. This includes booking, initial holding, and all the paperwork for every single case. Then comes the legal process. A flood of arrests will overwhelm the public defender's office, which is often already underfunded. And this would mean hiring more public defenders or paying for private court appointed attorneys, which both of these are expensive for individuals to perform. And I'm going down this position because I wanted to remind you guys that this is not as, it's a good thing, but it's not as good as some people say it is. The courts themselves would see their dockets swell up. More cases mean more judge time, more prosecutor time, more hours in the courtroom. This can create a backlog that slows down the whole justice system, delaying trials on not just those arrested in the crackdown, but for everyone else. Think about how that crackdown is going to delay the legal system with the deportations. There's a cost of jail. Every person held pending trial or sentenced to jail represents a daily cost to the local government for housing, food, medical care, and security. In a mass arrest scenario, the local jail population could explode, potentially forcing the county to look for expensive contracts with private jails or other counties where they would book them, process them, and then transfer them to another county. The revolving door method is going to be something else that's going to be a problem, because with the revolving door method, the justice system is going to be perceived as incredibly expensive, which is what they didn't really want everybody to think about. Hold on, he says, I'll take that bet. It affects everything. It's gonna affect a lot of things. You got to realize this. Research shows that it could cost taxpayers an average of $31,000 a year to criminalize just one person experiencing homeless or being homeless, and then if you compare that to just over $10,000 to provide them with supportive housing, while not every arrest will be a homeless person, this is showing how enforcement heavy approaches are often way more expensive than solutions that fix the root cause. And that's one of the things that we're not paying attention to, is that we could split the officers who are duty-bound lawyers to one another, split the officers up to a different position and spread the money out a little bit further. But when you think about all the people that are going to jail, you know, a common feature of this particular type of situation is going to be crackdowns. And this is clearing of the homeless in camps, because this is what really quick, I got to sidestep on exactly what they're doing here. He said they will be judged under martial law. Yeah, I forgot about that part. I completely forgot about that part. So here's a problem with martial law. When they're judged under martial law, almost everything is treated as a federal offense or some type of treason or terrorism, which is completely different from the regular trespassing charge or the regular resisting arrest without or obstruction kind of thing. When you're out there acting under martial law, you're acting on federal court, which means that instead of getting scooped up and driven to your local county jail, you get scooped up and drug off to like Alcatraz or some shit like that, instead of going down to your local jailhouse, where if you frequent there on a regular basis for your drunk tank thing, you're not even going to get through those doors. You're going to end up in the back of a black site vehicle, and they're going to take you to a federal prison where the Corleones are or some stuff like that. You're going to be somewhere far, far away from normal civilization. Talk about bond. Bond who? Bond what? Nah, you stuck, bro. He said, and lined up against a wall. Nah, that's not that. That's the stuff that you see on the movies. What really happens is that everybody's face down in the dirt with their hands on their heads until they can get zip tied with their hands zip tied to their feet, and then everybody is carried to a back of a vehicle like briefcases, and then thrown into a back of a larger vehicle that's then driven off site. They're not treated with respect. You think that, oh, they're just going to be like facing a wall, like hands up against a wall, and just like hanging out like I'm trying to think of which movie that they actually did that in. NWA movie, that movie Life, New York Undercover, NYPD Blue, Blue Bloods. You think they treat them like that? No. Think of some of the worst cop movies you could ever think about and be like, oh yeah, they do it like that. They kick the door in, snatch everybody up. They got more people than they got handcuffs, because you got to understand, they're going in like 10 or 20 squad deep, and not everybody's got cuffs, but there's like more people than there are police officers. So again, they're going in there with more people than they got handcuffs. So they're coming out with more people than they got which means they're going to have, most of the people are going to be zip tied. You can have a bag of zip ties in your back pocket as a police officer and be able to detain 35 people, but each police officer's only got one pair of metal handcuffs. So you just got to understand, there is no such thing in, we're just going to sit here up against the wall and just be still. No. Everybody put their face in the dirt. They might even make you pick your feet up off the ground and put your hands on your head and don't move or you'll get shot. That's you got to recognize. We talk about militarized detainment. We're not talking about civilian detainment. We're not talking about Johnny Law, who haven't seen the gym membership in forever and the donuts are starting to show in his uniform. We're not talking about that guy. We're talking about the Chuck Norris in camouflage with an AK-47 that knows how to come in and take care of business. And because this is the National Guard, the part-timers, what are the odds that they're hopefully not being deployed into their own neighborhood? Because that would suck, because now you got to arrest your best friend, and it's all in the line of duty. It's just business. You gotta understand that this is some of the factors. We don't think about this, but we have to ask ourselves exactly what is causing so much of the militarization, right? When I looked into it deeply, they're doing it on the crime thing, right? But they're also doing it on the homeless thing. They're primarily, so we have a combination of the deportation and the dismantling of in camps at the same time, under the guise of crime lord syndicate kind of stuff, right? So now they're gonna comb the cities Everywhere there's a large group of homeless people that are accumulating in an open field or in some woods somewhere that is not authorized on some type of private property, they're going to shut that down. They're going to shut that down. So, I mean, unless a homeowner who owns a plot of land puts up a fence and calls this like a legitimate camp, where they can't go there and put everybody off, they're going to go over there and they're going to mow through it. Now, these sweeps are often pitched as a public health and safety measure, but they come with their own big and often repeating price tag for the citizens and the city. Because as you have to recognize, one thing you have to remember, the police officers are trained based on the environment that they're in. So if you're in a city where the citizens are more respectful and less chaotic, the police officers will be less offensive and less violent. If you have citizens in a city that are more retaliatory and defiant, you have more hostile and overly aggressive police officers. Now, one of the things that you have to think about here is that when you're taking military personnel who were trained to function in a war zone where they weren't arresting people, they were detaining hostages and prisoners of war, and you take that type of training and you bring it to a social construct where, yet again, they don't know shit about the law. They are just following orders. Detain this group of individuals is the order. It doesn't matter if it's legal or not. Go get them and bring them here is the instruction. That is what they're going to do by any means necessary. So if you resist, you might get shot. You might get tased. You might get hit with some combat level pepper spray that might last on your clothes for a week that you don't know, because the military is not as lenient as local police. That's something that you got to face that fact. That's the truth. He said, tier 1, you're not coming out. Look, if you treat this like GTA policing, the 1 star is when the cop stops you and asks you what your name is, and you don't have to tell him and keep walking. The 2 star is when 2 or 3 squad cars show up out of nowhere to deliberately force you to cooperate. The 3 star is when the unmarked vehicles show up and start asking inappropriate questions at the wrong time to not only embarrass you, but make your entire community believe that you're the next O.J. Simpson. The 4 star, that's when the National Guard shows up. So from GTA standards, Memphis, Tennessee is a 4-star wanted meter right now. And you got to understand, that's rough, because it doesn't get from here. You've got the 5-star where they start bringing in the tanks. That's it. You got tanks coming in. You got giant barrels of pepper spray coming down from helicopters. You've got SWAT and everybody coming off of helicopters that are, and parachuting down in gigantic black outfits with masks on, and it's crazy. Y'all don't understand. Is it only a foot would do that? Or no, he said only a fool would do that. No, hey, look. You gotta understand. You got folks that actually do resist the law. You've got the sovereign nation people who, born and raised in America, denounced their citizenship. They haven't gotten scooped up yet, but they are traveling, not driving. Fuck them. I'm driving. I am U.S. commerce driving with my U.S. driver's license because I am a business. And I'm going to work my way into making sure that my business doesn't have to pay as much taxes on all the stuff that I got going on. So when they come through with the bullshit, I'm trying to figure out why first and foremost. But no, they got some folks out there. Then you got the people that are undocumented that haven't been swooped up yet. I told y'all come August, September, October that it was going to get worse. They're still deporting people. And that's going to be the next thing we're going to be talking about is that how does this get worse for us? Because we're going to have minorities are going to have this worse than anyone, believe it or not. You're going to get targeted because you're a minority. You're going to get targeted and ID'd because you don't look like you're a natural born American. What does that look like? Because we're in a freaking melting pot. But everybody who doesn't have their will ID with them expect to be put into a black van. He says Los Angeles is already called the brown city due to all the crap on the ground. That was inappropriate. Well, I'm going to tiptoe past that one, Michael, because there's going to be a lot more crap on the ground now. You see after Los Angeles. So first of all, Los Angeles already got burned to the ground for 6 weeks, right? Almost 2 months, right? From January through February, right? Then they had the riots over there, right? And with the police state that the military state they had out there with the martial law and stuff, and I think it only lasted for a few days to a week. Now they're starting to have more and more reasons to do exactly the same thing. You're going to have a large quantity of military force there. They're going to have riot shields. They're going to start setting up curfews. There's going to really start pushing buttons to a lot of people. And you have to understand that this becomes problematic because the process of a sweep involves police, sanitation workers, and social services. The direct cost includes the labor for crews clearing the sites, waste disposal, and storing any personal belongings that are seized from any of those in camps when they start sweeping those areas and getting rid of all those people. A report that analyzed in-camp sweeps in 4 major U.S. cities found that in 2019, the spending on these activities was a high as $8.5 million in San Jose. Focusing on the fact that they're not just out there picking up the cartel. They're not just out there picking up the shoplifters. They're specifically out there picking up all the homeless people with military force. Pay attention. There is an underlying reason why this is happening. And it is happening in multiple cities around the country, but Memphis was just highlighted on the news. And when we talk on this and that about this, that, and everything in between, my primary focus is how does this shit impact your daily budget? The cost per person displaced from the in-camp was anywhere from $1,600 to a shocking $6,200. So where these homeless folks was able to find a place to mind their own damn business in the woods, not mess with nobody, and didn't cost taxpayers anything, it is now costing almost $7,000 to relocate them to a place that doesn't piss off the U.S. government. And the property owner wasn't complaining about it, but it's an eyesore. So we're going to spend almost $7,000 a person to relocate these people. And these costs are almost always paid by the American citizens, since federal funds generally can't be used for in-camp removals or policies, right? So what makes this expense even worse is that it is ineffective. This is the part that I thought was important for everybody. Research and experience shows that just clearing an encampment does little to solve the homelessness. Because didn't I just tell you the amount of money it costs for them to deploy this type of operation is about the same amount of money that it would cost for them to create housing for these individuals so that they would no longer be homeless. And with that house, you give them some clothes, you give them some soap, you let them take a bath, and guess what they can do? Find a freaking job. Because you could be qualified for the job, but if you have hygiene problems because you're homeless, they're still not going to hire you. If you solve the problem of homelessness, you fix the problem of lack of employment. Think about that. They should have done a contract where they pick up these homeless people and have a payback plan kind of situation where, regardless of what their credit worthiness is, you take them off the streets, you put them into a housing facility, and then you take 25% of their paycheck every month. And that reimburses the government for taking you off the streets. You can have that scenario set up where, put them on a work release program. You can even set something up where even if you're giving them free room and board and you're taking 50% of your paycheck to cover the cost of it, is still way cheaper than for the homeless person to pay their way through life than it is for taxpayers to pay for a homeless person's way through life. That's just my observation. And most homeless people don't want to be homeless. They just don't have an opportunity to not be homeless. So I don't understand why, instead of putting all of this money towards forcing them to go somewhere else on American soil while still being unemployed and still not having a stable place to live, which only moves the problem to another location. Imagine throwing a bunch of dirt on your floor, right? And then no dustpan, no garbage can, just move the dirt to different rooms of the house. That's what you're doing with homeless people. You're not stopping homelessness, you're just relocating it. And it's costing American taxpayers billions of dollars. He said, America is not the same as when you and I grew up. Yeah, I know. America is not nowhere near the way it used to be back when we was young. America used to have more camaraderie. I grew up in a state where if you wasn't from here, everybody around here would take you in and show you where to go to find work, show you where to go to find resources, get you set up, put in a good word with the landlord, get you a place to stay. There'll be so much stuff going on where I come from. Nowadays, they're just like, get off my land. What you mean? Let me get you a lawnmower, bro. You ain't got no place to go. You can have the mom and pop suite of the house, and then you can be the caretaker of the property, painting the house and fixing the roof and cleaning the windows and cutting the grass and taking the dog out for a walk. And look now, room and board. It's the Southern model. Remember 1945? Remember 1945 back on the plantation? Nobody got a paycheck, but everybody worked to eat. If you bring that model back, you can pick up like 3 or 4 different homeless people and give them some room and board. Now find some stuff to do. Find one that's a good driver. Get them a driver's license. I'm just saying. Then you got a chauffeur. I'm just saying. It don't cost $1. He just glad that he ain't sitting on the street no more. Michael says, homeless don't like the woods. They're being around the town closest to services. Actually, no. Homeless people gravitate towards the services during business hours. But because it has been outlawed for years that homelessness leads to mandatory incarceration. Homelessness actually is in camps or in the woods, off the beaten path, where they're not readily seen by the average individuals, where they're not readily seen by law enforcement during patrols, so that they're not forcibly relocated, trespassed, or detained and then put in jail. So while they don't want to be in the woods, typically you will find a 5 or 10 man or 20 man in camp where they have tents, they have campfires, they have all kinds of stuff in those areas where they're just, and they're probably 20 to 30 feet into the woods. And that's where the camp would be seen, past 2 or 3 layers of trees, where if you were driving past, you wouldn't notice it. But if you were up in there, walking around cutting grass or walking around picking up trash or something like that, yeah, they'd be in there. They'd be in there. You can find them. Michael says, it would be cheaper if they moved in with you. Shoo! Well, okay. It would be cheaper if they moved in, if instead of taking so much American dollars and putting it towards military forces to force these people to shuffle into different locations, it actually would be cheaper if they had a um, incentive where if you take in some certain quantities of homeless people and house them, that they would give you a small subsidy, like they do with orphan kids. That would fix that would minimize homelessness everywhere, because anybody who has an extra bedroom would be like, shoot, you can stay here, they're going to give me $300 a month to house you. Like, that's going to help with the rent, with the way inflation is going. But they don't think about stuff like that, and that type of incentive has never been offered to the American people. Taking a homeless person for $400 a month. That homeless person, all you got to do is help them get their ID and show the government that that person's now staying at your address, and you get you a check renting out the room. Shoot, if they threw that incentive out there, you would have less homeless people. But without a real strategy, which includes some type of shelter services to help these people with getting the things that they need, and housing that really solves, because that's the core problem, is they don't have a place to live. Displaced people often just move to another public space, and this leads to a new in-camp and the need for another costly sweep down the road. So they're launching billions of dollars worth of troops into Memphis, Tennessee, to flood all of the homeless people somewhere else, not necessarily to get rid of the mafia that they're claiming the military is needed. They're not doing that to move them out. You know what I'm saying? They're literally there just to sweep the homeless people. So as one expert noted, a sweep can have a long-term cost in terms of eliminating whatever stability the people living in the in camps were able to attain. Now, usually when the homeless people have accessibility to reasonable resources, they're less likely to steal. They're less likely to unnecessarily trespass further than the in camp that they've created. And they're less likely to have break-ins where people's houses are being robbed by homeless people. When you take those resources away, though, or relocate them to a new environment where there's no resources that they're aware of, that forces more shoplifting, that forces more break-ins, that forces more robberies, that it causes more problems than it helps. Now, this cycle of displacement and clearing becomes a reoccurring line item in the city's budget, a costly and pointless exercise that drains resources from more prominent solutions. For example, a program in Denver that provided supportive housing not only stabilized people's lives, but also saved the city about $6,900 per person annually in reduced emergency services calls and police interactions. The hidden bill for Memphis then isn't a one-time charge. It's a potential long-term mortgage of strained services, a swamped justice system, and the reoccurring useless cost of addressing visible poverty with force instead of solutions, right? Now, beyond the direct cost of federal and city spreadsheets, deploying the National Guard creates a powerful ripple effect that can mess with a city's economy in a quiet but serious way. He said Xander's taking us in. Uh, hold on. I'm gonna have to sit the dog next to me so I can show you exactly how much space I got to put all of us in the podcast. How many rooms you got? Not enough. In some states, there are upward of 30 to 300,000 homeless people. That's a lot of people. You can fit a lot of people in Diddy's old house. You can fit a few dozen more people in Drake's old house. You know what I mean? Instead of shoving them all in my house, you know, Chris Brown can make some room for some folks. You know what I mean? Uh, Wait, Will Smith and Jada Pinkett each got their own mansion. They could take in like 30 people. Like, why do I gotta take everybody in? Trying to put the work on me. He said food included. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No. I'll start up an orphanage because at least with an orphanage, I'm gonna get some type of federal assistance. I can't take it in on my dollar. But the perception of a city under military occupation, whether it's accurate or not, can become an economic reality because it can affect everything from tourism to long term investments. And this is the intangible cost. So, the economic damage that happens when a city's image changes from a place of culture to a place of purely identified as a conflict zone. That completely changes the whole thing because you have to recognize when there's like one or two police cars passing by every now and again, that's nothing because you expect to say I feel peaceful in a way because at least I know that there is a cop every 15 minutes since they pass by here every 15 minutes. But when you see a military tank and AK-47s riding through every 15 minutes, you don't really feel as safe. You're like, damn, what the fuck go on around here that all this got to happen every 15 minutes? He said, most are on drugs or have mental issues or both. That's not actually true. That is not actually true. A lot of people believe that the majority of homeless people are either drunk, on drugs, and have mental issues. You develop mental issues from prolonged stress, and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You have nowhere to go, but you legally are not allowed to stand still in public. You have nowhere to sleep, but you legally are not allowed to sleep in public. You have nowhere to take a bath, but you're legally not allowed to take a bath in public. And you can't go places thanking. You have nowhere to put whatever clothes you got on your back, but you really can't, you're not going to be allowed in a lot of places if your clothes is all dirty and you smell bad. Not even the church. The church, who is supposed to be open to everybody, who is not supposed to judge anybody, will judge people. It's terrible. They don't have the mental instability, and the instability is the reason why they're homeless. They're homeless because they don't have an opportunity. If they lost their house from a bankruptcy, they lost their house from an eviction, or the last flood that happened in Florida when the hurricane happened this time last year, and they lost their house, they're homeless now, right? When you get evicted, you 5 to 10 years from that eviction can't rent nothing else. So where are you living? On the street. They foreclose on your house and you end up going bankrupt. Where are you living? On the street. Unless you have a family or friend that'll take you in. If you lost your job, once you lose your job, eventually you end up on the street if you don't got somebody taking care of you. So you will remain homeless until you can fix all of your problems at the same time. Because if once you become homeless, one of the things that happens is that you lose track of your shit. Your IDs come up missing, your money come up missing, your everything comes. And then when you're trying to replace it, it's hard to replace your stuff. Then with not having the right things that you need, it's hard to go out and get you a job. You don't have access to technology. You don't have the capabilities to keep your hygiene up to code in order for you to go and get that job. So what's really holding them back is a lack of opportunities. It's not that they're just out there drunk. He said, well, what's the solution? He said, you like my house better. No, I know my house is pretty, but it ain't big enough to hold 300,000 people. The solution is more effectively to create a program that does one or two things. You subsidize American citizens that voluntarily take in homeless people and aid those homeless people in getting on their feet, because there are probably 1 to 5% of every population is homeless people. So that means that out of the non-homeless population, those individuals that can take in at least one homeless person can get a little bit of money per person to take those homeless people in and help those people off the street and help those people get back on their feet. You have to play chess and go save the world. Do you know where your kids are? Well, they're not homeless, that's for sure. The other solution would be if the government programs were building more housing for specifically homeless people, not just a shelter per se, where you're throwing 30 people into a room, where you're actually building housing, even the little efficiencies, even the little mini homes, where you are building those and using those to put more people into a little efficiency or a mini home that they can maintain, where those would be a lot cheaper than a full-on apartment or something to that effect. A little 500 square foot mini home where you could probably put 3 or 4 of those or 8 of those, depending on a quarter acre piece of property. You could put a larger quantity of mini homes on a smaller acreage than what you could putting a full-on house on there, and start really building a way to bring people in off the streets. And then those people that come in off the streets, you put those people to work. The disabled can get their disability if they have an address. You've seen the government is talking about everything is going to be digitized, but in order for you to get a bank account, you got to have an address, which means that if you're not using the post office box as your address, you need another physical address. So if the government created housing for homeless people specifically, like $0 cost housing, where you will stay here for 2 years and then we'll move you somewhere else, that gets you off the street, helps you get cleaned up, and gives you 2 years to find a stable job. With that stable job, you should be able to get transitioned out of that refugee housing scenario into your own paying by rent scenario, probably in the same area as your job. And then you're capable of sustaining yourself one way or another, which prevents from having to sweep all of these issues. That's another solution, but they don't think about that. They don't think about $0 housing, $0 per month housing for 2 years to help the homeless people get reincorporated back into the society. But when you think about that, well, if you're paying $0 housing, how much money are you're paying for these homeless people per month? Well, think about it. If you're about to spend almost $1 million for a couple days worth of troops, you're talking about millions of dollars just to bring the troops here, and then you're talking about millions of dollars more to bring the equipment here. And if you think about the fact that, well, if you're thinking about $800 or $900 a month per homeless person, that's way cheaper than a few $100,000 a day for military soldiers in the same location, tackling the same objective. You actually would save money doing it a different way. Because again, if you put them up for 2 years, that gives them plenty of time. And if for some reason they're not able to transition into society, you can pay closer attention to them and give them 1 more year. Some people say, well, what happens after that 3rd year? What happens after the extended grace period happens? After the extended grace period happens, they're going to need another way. You're going to have to find another way. If they're not on disability because they legitimately qualify for disability, they're going to have to sustain themselves, or they're going to end up, ironically, in and out of jail for because the legal system. It is a crime to be homeless in the United States unless you climbed over the fence and applied for asylum. Then you can get asylum, which provides more services than the American people. But tourism is an industry that is built on perception, and it's extremely sensitive to the political climate and a feeling of safety. So the sight of armed soldiers with AK-47s in full military gear riding around on military vehicles with large ass rifles hanging out the roof of the vehicle on Bell Street or near Graceland is the opposite of a welcoming vibe that a city like Memphis relies on to bring in millions of dollars worth of visitors and their money that they're going to invest in the culture every year. History shows us that tourism almost always takes a nosedive when there's a conflict or even an appearance of one. Studies of other regions that have seen military tension show a direct and immediate impact. In areas affected by the Indian Pakistan conflict, the tourism sector collapsed, with hotels sitting empty and small businesses fighting to survive. A similar effect was seen in Washington, D.C. during federal development, where restaurants reservations dropped by as much as 25% as people stayed away from the areas with a heavy security presence. Small businesses in the hospitality industry reported a big drop in foot traffic, which signals a wider loss of consumer confidence. And for Memphis, a city that trades on its reputation as the home of the blues and the birthplace of rock and roll, the economic risk is huge. A family planning a vacation or a company planning a convention will think twice before picking a city that's being shown on the news as a crime-ridden hotspot needing military intervention when all they're doing is running all the homeless people to another area. The canceled hotel rooms, the empty restaurant tables, and the quiet music venues all means lost revenue for local businesses and lost tax money for the city. As one analyst noticed, any militarized environment can derail reforms and scare off investments. Now, this perception problem goes beyond tourism and into long-term economic development. Businesses want stability when deciding where to invest or relocate. A sustained military presence and the political controversy that comes with it creates an environment of uncertainty. Will the deployment be extended? Will there be civil unrest? Will the city become known as a place of conflict instead of opportunity? This uncertainty can scare off private investments in real estate, infrastructure, and new businesses. So, why would a developer start building a new hotel in a city where the future is dominated by questions of security and federal intervention? The presence of troops can signal risk to a market, causing investors to pause and take their capital to a city that seems more stable. A large influx of services and the members of those services can even have a direct impact on the local real estate market, competing with civilians for limited housing and driving up rent. Because remember, I told you, you bring 5 or 10,000 troops into the local environment, once they're no longer able to occupy the base, they're going to be renting at whatever the cost is, whatever is accessible near the base, which is going to put out local residents who can't afford the rent price. And that price hike for as many months or years as those troops are going to be in that location is going to make it more difficult for the locals to be able to afford the inflation, because the military troops are not paying for it out of their own pockets where they have to balance a budget. The government gave them a blank check to buy within reason what they need to buy so that they can perform their job duties. So an apartment for $4,000 a month, if that's the cost in that area, the government's going to pay for it. But if the cost in that area is $2,000 a month, but the landlord's jacking the price up, the government's going to pay it anyway because the troops need someplace to sleep. Which means if one person's willing to pay for it, 5,000 people's willing to pay for it, 10,000 people's willing to pay for it, well, we can do this across the board. Now, all of the property's gone up where the rent cost is higher. The long-term economic health of a city is built on a foundation of confidence. Now, the plan to deploy the National Guard, while meant to restore order, risks cracking the very foundation, which could lead to economic problems that stick around long after the troops are gone. So deploying the National Guard into an American city against the wishes of local officials isn't just a financial and social question, it's a profound legal one. It cuts to the core of the relationship between the military and civilian life in the United States. The legal framework here is complex, and it centers on a nearly 150-year-old law and the powerful expectations that can be used to get around it. At the heart of it is the Pose Comitatus Act of 1878. I think I said that wrong. Pose Comitatus Act of 1878, passed after a Reconstruction era. The act was a direct response to the U.S. Army being used to enforce laws in the former Confederate states. Because remember, this is the 1800s, back before the Civil War. The law makes it a federal crime to use the Army or Air Force to execute the law on domestic soil, unless it's specifically authorized by the Congress or Constitution. Now, the principle is a cornerstone of American democracy, a deep belief that law enforcement should be in civilian hands, separate from the military. The military is trained to defeat the enemy. Police are supposed to be trained to protect civilian populations, but they haven't been doing a very good job of that lately. The act was designed to keep those two organizations separate. However, the Pose Comitatus Act isn't absolute. It has critical exceptions. And the most powerful one is the Insurrection Act of 1807, which was passed before that. This law gives the president the authority to deploy federal troops at home to suppress an invasion and a rebellion, or when local authorities can't or won't maintain order and enforce federal law. Now, look at the loophole. Because if you call homelessness an invasion, you can deploy military troops to dismantle it. If you call any protesting and rioting as a result of that, like the protesting and rioting that occurred from the mandatory deportations, that's considered a rebellion. If law enforcement cannot maintain the state and federal laws that prohibits violent protest or prohibits homelessness in trespassing capacities and stuff to that effect, then that triggers this ability for the president to say, no, y'all can't handle it. We're going to put somebody out there that can. Because we have two problems. We have a rebellion and and an invasion from within the American people. That's the assumption, the perception. Historically, it's been used in moments of deep crisis, like when President Eisenhower sent troops to Little Rock. And they were used over there in Arkansas to enforce desegregation. The Trump administration has tested the boundaries of these laws, arguing that conditions in certain cities are an emergency that justifies federal action, even when state governors object. Now, the situation with the National Guard is especially tricky because Pose Comitatus generally doesn't apply to the Guard when they're operating under their state governor's command. But that changes completely when the president federales the Guard, policing them under his direct control. Once federalized, they're treated like adaptive, active duty troops, and the Pose Comitatus restrictions kicks in. To legally use them for law enforcement, the president would typically need to invoke an exception like the Insurrection Act and prove that state and local authorities are unable to do their jobs. This is exactly where the legal controversy is. The plan for Memphis pushes the country into legal murky waters. It forces a debate over what exactly counts as an insurrection, because a large number of American citizens renouncing their country and their heritage can be identified as a rebellion. So the sovereign land folks can be identified as a rebellion. Homeless people can be identified as people who refuse to incorporate themselves into the current economy could be perceived as a rebellion. An overwhelming quantity of something can be conceived as an insurrection. So they have to redefine it. Or some kind of a breakdown of order that's bad enough to justify military force has to occur. Is a high crime rate, even a record high one, the same as a rebellion? If a lot of crime is happening in a small period of time, legal experts are split about whether or not that's actually considered a rebellion, because truthfully, a rebellion would be the violent protest, not the non-violent protest. So when they start spray painting property, breaking windows, looting, stuff to that effect, that start when they're doing that, opposing the government, when they are fighting against the police in those protests, that is considered a rebellion. But armed robbery, drug trafficking, human trafficking, arson, trespass, criminal damage, criminal mischief, drag racing. We're starting talking about crimes now. These are all crimes. If you start with an abundance of that, is any of that actually opposing the government? While it is unlawful, it is not actually, in my observation, a true rebellion or a true upheaval that is trying to overthrow the government. It's just people not following the laws that are written. Some argue that courts usually give presidents a lot of room to decide what an emergency is. Others argue that using troops for routine crime fighting erodes the legal and philosophical lines that have long separated the police from the military, because the way the military is going to handle it is not the way the police are going to handle it. Do you think that a soldier is going to talk down a traffic stop? No, no, that car will look like Swiss cheese by the time they're done with it. You either follow instructions or you're going to be reloaded on by an M16. That's that. You think that the normal beat cops got you with their little 9mm, they Glock 19 Australia. The AK-47, you get pulled. You're not even getting pulled over by a squad car. You're getting pulled over by a Humvee. Shoot, you got a helicopter overhead. This is like Need for Speed when you get the 5 stars and you trying to get away. It's not going to be simple. Regardless of how the courts might rule, the action itself sets a powerful precedent. It normalizes the idea of using military force as a tool for urban policing. Now, this could have long-lasting effects on civil liberties and the balance of power in the United States. Each time troops are sent into a city to handle crime, it lowers the bar for doing it again, gradually chipping away at a nearly 150-year-old tradition of keeping the military out of domestic law enforcement, further reinciting everybody else's observation of this becoming a police state country. After accounting for the potential billions in federal dollars, the hidden cost to the city, the economic fallout, and the legal questions, we're left with the most basic questions of all. Does it even work? Will deploying the National Guard to Memphis actually reduce crime? The answer, according to the growing body of research, is a resounding and very troubling hell no. Crime is going to be crime no matter who criming a crime. And however they decide to go and put a stop. Okay, so here's the thing. You've got those people who only know how to do crime. And you have those people who choose to do crime because they're desperate and they don't have the resources that they need to survive. That's it. Now, from the latter, the people who only participate in crime because they don't have enough resources to survive, if you improve the ability to acquire resources legally, they're less motivated to commit crime. Take, for example, the people who are robbing Walmart because it was deemed not a felony to take a certain quantity of money below that amount where they would not even be arrested for it because it was a nonviolent crime. All of the poor people were in Walmart, robbing Walmart, boldly walking out the front door with 2 or 3 shopping carts full of stuff until Walmart started putting armed guards at the door, not allowing people to walk out of their door with the product because they were too poor to afford all of that food. And you know, the funny thing is that they were out there running off with shopping carts full of sodas and junk food. I ain't seen too many folks with like 18 bags of rice and 20 bags of beans where they were like, I'm gonna do this one time, but this gonna last us all year. Nah. They were Doritos and Cheetos and Sprites and Coca-Colas. They didn't even know how to rob responsibly. But the point was that they're at a shortage of resources. All of the money that it cost Walmart to put security guards there, all of the cost that it costs Walmart for all of the started products that happens in their store, they could solve the problem by reducing the freaking prices so that people stop stealing. So instead of solving the core problem, we're taking more drastic actions to spite the problem, which causes more problems. The debate is often framed as a trade-off between safety and civil liberties. Benjamin Franklin said we're not supposed to sacrifice our civil liberties for our safety or sacrifice our safety for our civil liberties, because if you have to give up one for the other, you don't deserve either of them. But studies suggest that might be a false choice to sacrifice civil liberties for safety. A study on military policing in California, Colombia, well, it was Cali, Colombia, a city with one of the highest violent crime rates in the world, found little to no evidence that the military intervention reduced the crime. The researchers were surprised, expecting to see at least a temporary drop, but the data didn't back that up. In fact, they noted that in some cases, crime actually went up after the intervention was over. There was a conclusion that was blunt. The benefits of military policing are probably small and not worth the cost. This finding is eroded by criminologists who study violence in American cities. There's very little research on using the National Guard for routine crime control, mostly because it's been so rare. But the evidence that we do have from similar strategies, like surging police into high crime areas, suggests the effects are often very minimal and short lived. One expert noted that for the most part, simply increasing numbers doesn't make a big difference. Crime is a complex social problem, not a military objective. As soon as the overwhelming show of force is gone, the underlying issue that drives the crime, which is poverty, lack of opportunity, and social problems, are still there. And crime rates often bounce right back. So notice how Trump gave all of the newborns from 2025 to 2028 $1,000. Now, if he gave them $1,000 per year plus interest, they might see at the age of 18 or 19 years old, when they go to pull that money out, a guaranteed no less than $19,000 or $20,000 in the bank, plus interest and whatever the family members threw down on it as well. If that were the case, every American city in 20 years would be able to buy their own house when they first turn 18. And truth, if you're the oldest kid in the family, you can put your 20 grand down as a down payment towards a house and buy the house for mom and dad. As long as your name is on the deed, you got a house. So you don't have to have a damn good job. You just got to have the 20 grand to put towards the house and have your name on a deed, and mom and dad can afford to pay for the house. But now, if you've got a sister and a brother and all this other stuff, their money can be held for the next house. That's the dynamic. Now you don't have to worry about not having enough money for rent, not having enough money for college and stuff like that. But that's going to help 3 generations from now get better, right? But it's a solution. If they hit the ground running because there's money there for them to start with, they're less likely to fall into a destitute position and then start performing desperate actions and activities. People who sell themselves under the table are selling themselves for the fact that they don't have enough ways to get money legally. And this way is easy, quick money. That's what selling drugs is about. Easy, quick money. It's not because they like drugs to sell. They sell them for profit because we don't really work hard. But beyond not really working hard, we have the magnitude of observation that, in addition to being lazy, there aren't very many opportunities out there because there's more of us in the country than there are individual qualifying positions for non-PhD, non-master's degree, non-10 years in the field kind of jobs. Startup jobs that have no education limits, no years of experience limits, that will take in anybody who's willing to perform the task. There's less of those than there are unemployed people. So now, in order for you to stand out, you have to show that you have more skills than the next person, that you have more education than the next person, which means that you got to wait because you got to get those skills from working for somebody as an intern and get that education from going to a private college or a community college. Experts are going to argue that effective violence reduction strategies are focused, balanced, and legitimate. And a National Guard deployment fails on all three counts because it's an unfocused, blunt instrument, not a targeted strategy aimed at the specific people and places driving the violence. It's unbalanced, representing a massive investment in enforcement with little to no matching investment in community service or job programs, which would fix the underlying issue. Because if you create housing for homeless and have a job program, because there is an incentive out there for businesses to hire people that are fresh released out of jail, that are homeless, that are coming out of rehab. You have work release programs, and the government pays these entities to hire these people so that these people can work and then pay for their way of living. If you put multiple programs together with all the millions of dollars that they have in at-risk housing development, if they just built the stuff themselves and put it down there for the people would see more results. And it's unlikely to be seen as a legitimate situation if you're just leaning on military by the residents of the communities that the military are going to interject in, especially when those civilians weren't consulted and whose own elected officials opposed the intervention. So, ironically, the justification for the Memphis deployment itself rests on shaky grounds. Because while the administration points to high crime rate from 2024, more recent data from early 2025 shows that violent crime in Memphis was already trending downward, way down, before the announcement was even made. As mentioned earlier, major violent crimes have dropped significantly. Homelessness is still homelessness, and all of the military force that is shoving all these homeless people into relocation, not actually preventing them from being homeless, that's going to be the problem. One of the main things when they're pushing the people off, they've had about 2,000 arrests that were actually crimes, gang violence related crimes. Everything else was arresting homeless people who refused to go to a homeless shelter. That was it. After that, they're in the system where they're going to spend, there's more people per jail, which means they don't have enough space in the jailhouse, which means they're going to be releasing more nonviolent crimes, drug pushers, because that's like one of the only things that that and probably theft is going to be the things that are going to get let go, because I mean they don't have enough beds because they're putting all these homeless people in there. You're going to have more trials, more hearings for more bonds. Bail bondsmen are going to start making more money so you can invest in bail. But then you have the problem with a lot of these people that are going to go on probation. And now they're going to be assigned to a probation officer. Now you got to have a probation officer riding around looking for all these people. And where are they? Because they don't have a place to stay. You know, the legal system is going to be overworked because putting them in jail is not the solution. And in order to be released from jail, technically, they're supposed to be able to show the judge that they're not going to recreate the same crime. And if you're homeless and they put you in for being homeless, when you get released, if you were homeless with a job and you're going to be in jail for 30 to 90 days, by the time you get out of jail, you've lost your job. So now the reason why you're going to get arrested again is because they arrested you the first time instead of just leaving you the fuck alone. This is going to mirror a national trend, which has seen crime rates fall across the country since the pandemic spike, where some analysis even suggests in 2025 that we might see the lowest murder rate ever recorded in the United States. You notice we haven't heard that many school shootings this year. I mean, yeah, your boy, the politician that got popped last week or so, that that was pretty tragic to see. But we have to realize the reason why the crime impacts us to our core so much now is because it doesn't happen as much as it used to. If you were stepping over a body every 3 blocks on your way to work and stepping over a different group of bodies every 3 blocks on your way back from work, a dead person on the side of the road isn't going to bother you. But if this is the first time in 5 years that somebody has died on your block, you're shocked and appalled. But think about the 6 bodies a day that you had to pass by that you no longer have to pass by anymore. Think about in neighborhoods where you used to hear the police at the top of every hour with a siren roar. And notice how now you might only hear the police on the weekend. Notice how you might have heard gunshots every afternoon in your neighborhood. And now the only time you hear gunshots is on the movies and your TV. Crime has gone down significantly across the country. It is now easily publicized, but crime has gone down significantly across the country. The only problem is that the little bit of crime that is seen is now reasonably observed as extreme in comparison to no crime, not in comparison to the old crime. Got to think about that. And this will suggest that the deployment is a solution in search of a problem, or at least a problem that was already getting better. Where they're sending out the military, which will cause a problem, so that the military can resolve the problem that they caused by showing up. Criminologists argue that if the goal is to generally reduce violence, the billions of dollars being considered for this deployment would be far more effective if they were invested in evidence-based solutions, repairing the city's justice system, improving crime lab services, and strengthening community violence intervention programs that have a proven track record of success. They could also put it towards resources that prevents people from having to commit these violent crimes so that they're less motivated to perform those actions. So back to the central question. What is the true cost of sending the National Guard to Memphis? The answer isn't a singular number. It's a vast and layering ledger of consequences. There's a direct federal cost, a bill that could easily exceed $1 billion, paid by the taxpayers and pulled from other nations' national priorities. There's a hidden bill for Memphis, a tally of strained public services, and an overburdened justice system. There's an economic cost. That's what we're going to have, an economic cost, which is going to be the quiet damage to the city's reputation, scaring away tourists and investors who are the lifeblood of its economies. Then there's the legal cost, the erosion of a core American principle that separates the soldiers from the police officers. And finally, there's the most profound cost of all, which is the cost of a failed strategy. The evidence strongly suggests that this massive expenditure of money, political capital, and military power won't lead to a lasting reduction in crime. It is a temporary show of force, not a long-term solution. So ultimately, the plan to deploy the National Guard to Memphis forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. When our governments respond to a complex social problem with a blunt instrument of military force, are we paying for a solution, or are we just paying for the appearance of a solution? The final cost may be measured not just in dollars, but in the loss of opportunity to invest in the things that truly make a community safe. We have to remember we have predetermined dispositions, stereotyping that exists in every country around the world, social classism that exists in every country around the world. And you're going to release the military into an environment where they will judge people based on the way they look, not necessarily what they've done already, what they quote unquote might do, and then take action. Since they passed the real ID bill, you guys are going to have your real ID or your passport card on you with the real ID on it. Because talking back to them about whether or not you're going to show them the ID because you're an American citizen, if you can't prove that you're an American citizen by showing that ID, they can bust your window, snatch you out of your vehicle, and throw you into a back of a SWAT vehicle and drop you off in the middle of a military black site. Because just as Michael talked about earlier, usually when they drop the National Guard down, they're in a state of emergency, which makes it a military state. They're under martial law, which means every defiant behavior that conflicts with the officers' or soldiers' ability to perform their duties is not just obstruction of justice, it's a federal level offense. Now, that's going to make people not feel comfortable with leaving their house. That's going to have people not feel comfortable with shopping in certain locations. While, yeah, it will calm the streets temporarily, and when they have nothing left to enforce, their job here is done, and then they relocate. But the fact is that once they disappear, the homeless people will come back, and the crime will come back because the cause of the crime and the cause of the homelessness was never fixed. They just, it's almost like having a leak in the boat, and you're going to splash the water around to make waves. You didn't fix the boat, boat's still sinking. But when you stop splashing the water around, the water that's in the boat stops rippling. And that's basically all they're doing here. You're going to shake up the city by running through it with a military force and then leave. The other problem that I didn't talk about this is that the codependency developed by the local law enforcement while the military presence is there is going to hinder the law enforcement's capabilities of effectively maintaining the same level of authority because, one, you don't have the fucking manpower. And then because you have less officers than you have citizens, when the AK-47s and M16s leave the area and the only thing left is a Smith & Wesson or a Glock, it's every man for himself. You guys got to think about it. If you believe that the deep dive investigations like these are essential for holding our leaders accountable, please consider subscribing to the channel because we're going to have a lot more of these that's going to be coming up soon. Make sure that you guys take the opportunity to hit the notification bell because we're going to be talking to you about different ways to invest on Tuesday and Wednesday and personal development improvement that we're going to be talking on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and our questions and comments from the fans on Sunday. These stories take a lot of time and a lot of resources to produce, so your support makes it possible. Make sure that you take the time to let us know in the comment section, what do you think is the most effective way to address the crime in American cities? Because once we start brainstorming the core problem, we can start finding true solutions. Now, with that being said, I really appreciate you guys for hanging out with me on tonight's show. I'm going to start off by saying, ladies, as long as the situation doesn't make sense, I'm going to keep asking ladies to make it make sense. So ladies, please make it make sense. Also, fellas, I give you guys this information to help you guys become higher value men because while we are 65% male-driven podcast from the male's perspective, more and more women are coming in and learn ways that they can improve themselves. So you can find you a better partner by self-development before we start doing social development. Remember that the things that you do with your business life impacts your personal life, and the things you do with your personal life impact your business life. So by improving your business life, you have more resources and more time for your personal life. And by improving your personal life, you have more time to think about how to remaster your business life, reinforcing success. Take the time, if you're watching this, I see there's a lot of y'all following us from Twitter today. Take the time to hit that follow button. because we also have different countries we're going to be investing in, places to go. And there's a lot of different topics that we're going to be covering. And this week's theme is going to be addressing different areas of marriage. So, and the construct as to why it fails and what we can do to fix it. Because just like I told you today, what we can do to fix what they're trying to stop is create programs to put a stop because the actions are reactionary to the core problem. By fixing the core problem, they're not motivated to react the way they used to react, which prevents them from performing the things that have the military coming to Memphis in the first place. Now, if there was a discussion where there was like a mob war and they were redirecting the National Guard to go and suppress a mafia war, that would have made total sense. But what they're out there doing right now is arresting everybody who doesn't have a place to go and having more available officers to arrest for violent crimes. So you're going to be violent crimes is going to be assaults, shootings, stabbings, stuff to that effect, which puts a lot of us in a lot more hostile scenarios, because instead of them running in there and taking the one guy, they probably would take everybody just to make sure they got the right one. We got to think about how this is going to impact us going forward. We're not going to feel comfortable when we pulled over, because when we're getting pulled over, there's going to be some soldiers in the squad cars now. The details are extensive as to what all will be done when you dial 911 these days. Who's showing up? Is there going to be a tactical team standing outside your house, or is it just going to be 2 deputies? You got to ask yourself, how long is this going to be? Because I didn't hear of a set destination or a time limit for execution. We haven't seen that yet. So let's stay tuned to see what's going on. I want to thank you guys for coming to tonight's show. And if I haven't said it already, ladies, as long as the situation doesn't make sense, I'm begging you, ladies, please make it make sense. But thank you guys for coming to tonight's show. I am your host, Xander, where we talk about this, that, and everything in between. And I will be seeing you guys tomorrow night.
Chase validation, now I validate myself. Building inner strength, putting doubt upon the shelf. No more unnecessary drama, no more wasted time. Climbing higher, constantly making my own climb. My network is my net worth. Choose your company wise. Surround yourself with eagles, not with sheep in disguise. Every interaction is a reflection of my brand. Quality over quantity, that's my personal command. expectations are my compass, my respect is my shield. To mediocrity and chaos, I will never yield.